Good afternoon, everyone, or good evening, depending on where you're joining from. It's my great pleasure to welcome you to today's The Judge Club meeting and to introduce Zuleka Kaysan, the Managing Director of the Cornerstone Advisory, and Ivan Palomino, Managing Partner of People Cult. Today, they will give us some insights on how to create and sustain an effective in-house innovation lab, which should help you transform and grow your business. And without further ado, I'll leave you to Ivan and Zuleka. First of all, please do not hesitate to participate, leave your comments or any questions that you might have in the chat. We'll do our best to visit them all after the presentation is done. So, Zuleka, Ivan, over to you.
Thank you very much. I think that it's good to start with a little bit of context. And for that, let me frame a little bit my experience. Approximately 12 years ago, I was put in a position where I didn't know exactly what to do. And that was a position that had to do with corporate innovation. And the funny thing is that when you start corporate innovation, everybody believes that we know what it means because everybody wants to change. Everybody wants innovation, new things coming up. People are going to be well established and really on the road in order to change the world. But it's not like that. So when we go back to this concept of innovation lab, everybody knew back then during my 12 years ago that an innovation lab is a dedicated space, physical or virtual, where it's about fostering experimentation, collaboration, and rapid prototyping to develop new ideas, services, or new business models. And that was the pain. But back then, we didn't understand one important thing, which is that in order to trigger this startup-like mindset, we needed to change how people think about innovation. So it goes beyond encouraging employees to think outside the box, to challenge assumptions. And then we started working in this, let's find a methodology that everybody can embrace and communicate in the same way. And then we started experimenting with design thinking, agile development, the lean and startup principles, which are tools indeed that any entrepreneur uses. But behind the use of these methodologies, there is a mindset. These entrepreneurs want to reduce the risk as much as possible of failure. They are hungry because they know if they use up all their money, they are not going to be successful. So coming back to the point, and in order to drive innovation labs, we need to go beyond just the process itself. We need to take care of different things that are going to foster that people and the culture of the organization is going to change. There was a very interesting report from Capgemini that the vast majority of innovation labs, 90%, one expert says, fail to deliver on their promise. This change, this experimentation, because people get fed up when you push them innovation where they haven't been involved. And the funny thing is that very often organizations forget that in order to drive these innovation labs, you need to have infrastructure or enablers. You need to have people who wants that change, and you need to have a purpose. And that's the interesting thing, that starting with the purpose is essential in order to drive this new change. Zuleka has been working quite a lot to understand and drive and design purposes for organization. And Zuleka, maybe you can tell me a little bit more about how you do it and how it works, in fact.
You know, it's interesting you said 12 years ago. So back sort of around 20 years ago, we were looking at change. About 10 years ago, we were looking at transformation projects. And now just the scale and size of what people are trying to achieve in a short amount of time, we're definitely looking more towards what they're calling innovation, which is definitely more fast scale. So maybe to twist the angle, Ivan, we start by talking about the purpose of the innovation lab. Why do we need it, and what makes it more than a buzzword today? because everyone's saying innovation. For us, the way that we work, the core idea behind the Innovation Lab is super simple. It's a dedicated space where new ideas are created, they're tested, they're refined, and it's really the engine in an organization that drives innovation. But then how's that different to R&D departments? And why would we need a separate lab for innovation when we already have these R&D departments? The challenge that traditional R&D really faces, they're often a core group of people that work together. This is usually, traditionally, been the same group of individuals that work together day in, day out. Usually, again, they're super siloed from the rest of the organization, which means they're not necessarily on the front line dealing with the challenges that are being presented by customers or employees or the supply chain. And they're not necessarily interacting with all these different facets. So that means two things. The same group of people, the same rotation of mindset and ideas, it stifles the creativity that Ivan was talking about. What we know is that the more minds that are looking at problems or challenges from their respective angles, it means that the ideas are more thought through. So we like, we're going to talk about it in a moment, but we like the concept of building on each idea to create something that's more robust for a business. And also, secondly, the sense of urgency isn't typically there with the traditional R&D functions. They have a sort of linear process, maybe sometimes agile, but they have a period where things are tested in a controlled environment before it's launched, sometimes a little bit too late to go back and make changes. So innovation labs really bridge that gap. They're not tied to that traditionalism that R&D departments have. Instead, there's more of a freedom to explore new territories, look at the technologies, and just keep an eye on what's coming next from across the organization. So if I was to break it down into 4 parts, the first is what you mentioned, Ivan, is innovation labs are about coming up with those ideas, and you need to foster that culture of creativity and experimentation. And this is more than just saying, here you go, come up with ideas. It's really about having, saying it's okay to push boundaries and rewarding curiosity. And it just creates a steady stream of ideas. So knowing that some are going to work, some are not going to work, it's a numbers game. The more we have, the better the chance of success. And then the second part is once you have these ideas, your constant validation. It's about testing really quickly. Again, learning from failures, iterating. Something that startups do really well, which the bigger companies that I almost certainly work with struggle with, is these minimum viable products, the mock-ups, the rapid feedback loops, because they're so steeped in bureaucracy, it just makes it a lot harder for them to do that. So the Innovation Lab, again, bridges that gap and making sure that that idea actually has legs before any heavy investment goes behind it. And maybe the kicker with this is that the Innovation Lab is accelerating that time to market. You know, we're in that era where we all are consumers. We want things quickly. Things are changing very quickly. Technology is moving very fast. So that process from concept to execution needs to be super streamlined and iterative. And that's where the Innovation Lab really shines. It gets rid of those bottlenecks that typically slow down those traditional R&D processes. And all of this is more focused on the execution of the idea. So not just the idea itself, but the absolute execution, which is the value driver. One more thing I'd probably mention that isn't maybe the first thing that comes to mind when we talk about innovation labs, but when we look at this, we look at the ecosystem. It's that innovation labs really drive organizational transformation. It's not necessarily, it's great, there's new products, new services, but they push for cultural change across the organization. And because the way that innovation labs work, they empower teams, irrespective of who they are and where they are, to really embrace this new way of thinking. And then these teams act as a catalyst for innovation throughout the business as well. So Ivan is going to tell us what it takes to make it work.
Zuleka, before you have mentioned something that is quite important, and several times people misunderstand that. This concept of minimum viable product, also called the shitty version of whatever you want to launch, in fact, is not about having a prototype that is just a broken version of what you aim to. It is a prototype that is answering to the biggest pain of the consumer, that even if it doesn't look nice, people will use it anyways. They will wait. Think about it. And I still remember the time when there was this bloody iPhone that went live and you couldn't do copy and paste. You remember that, Zuleka? So
I don't remember the copy and paste issue.
The first version of the iPhone, you couldn't do the copy and paste, and people were still hungry because it was answering to a specific need of everybody. So I love this, that in order to drive to identify these pains, what is the biggest pain, we need to understand two concepts. Who could be the early adopters? Early adopters equal the ones who have the biggest pain is a small population. But if this population embraces that change, then they're going to talk about it because they are relieved that somebody has given them finally a solution. And they're going to act as a catalyst in order that the next generation of users come and see and try the product. And that's something that entrepreneurs know quite well. I love also what you have mentioned about the execution part, because still today, there is let's say that there is some numbers behind that. 60% of companies who still believe that the concept of establishing innovation labs stop at the generation of ideas, and then there is nothing happening afterwards. So what do you do once you have your prototype? Once you have validated certain assumptions about your prototype, how do you scale this idea? And there is still many companies who get overexcited just about the idea without putting it into place because it will cost too much to make it happen. But the same way that you brought this idea to life, you can bring it to life in order to scale it up. And that's why there is different type of methodologies. So coming back to your question, sorry for the long break, but I wanted to tell you a little bit more about, in fact, to share something that we have built together, which is kind of a framework of how we see Innovation Lab working. So first of all, you need a moment of aspiration. So where this involves setting innovation aspirations and a strategic direction for the company. So this is the moment where leaders need to decide what is really the role that this innovation lab is going to play in terms of the growth strategy. Do we want just to improve something existing? Do we want to launch new products, but only focus on one function working on that product? Or do we want to act as a catalyst so that the full organization becomes a center of creativity where everybody feels empowered to bring ideas and to make them happen? And so also the aspiration step provides this feeling of alignment on the scope of innovation efforts. Then we need to be picking or choosing. So this element focus on defining the innovation portfolio and allocating the resources, money, people, into buckets. And usually when we do that, we use the 3 horizons model of innovation, where we think a little bit more about what needs to be solved now, or what is for the next 3 to 5 years, and what comes on the next 10 years. So this allocation of resources is going to be critical in order to put together the foundation of an innovation lab. Now, the next step that we have is the discovery part. Is a critical element involving processes for generating, capturing, and testing new ideas and insights from across the organization. So how are we going to do that? And it's not that easy. It's not like, guys, we're going to use the lean startup methodology and everything is going to work amazing. No. It goes beyond that, because we need to have this kind of the rules, how we are going to be judging new ideas, testing new ideas. What type of assumptions do we want to go and experiment with, so that we know that an idea could work? And in fact, the purpose, how we are going to be judging new ideas, and the purpose is as simple as reducing the risk of failure. The next step is about evolving. So this is about how we are going to unleash the capabilities for incubating, so making an idea become a prototype, accelerating, so the prototype to become a product, and scaling up the most promising innovations. So this part is very often forgotten inside of the innovation labs. That's what I was mentioning just before. The next step is about how we are going to accelerate things. So this element focuses on rapidly prototyping, testing, and commercializing. When I'm saying testing, it's not only about testing the idea, but all the assumptions that we had behind the idea. So if I'm defining a product, let's say for Philippe, so I need to understand what is his day-to-day, what is his pains, how does he feel about these pains, what is he using today when he cannot fulfill all of his needs. So the acceleration model is about the goal to accelerate time to market and the learnings, how you are going to accelerate the learnings across the organization. The next step is about scaling. It's about mainstreaming successful innovations and building adoption. So how are people going to get to know about it and understand across the organization, so that you can find also different type of uses for that feature innovation. And finally, is about mobilizing your people, which means having an organization who embraces that change across the organization and is able to commercialize it. In principle, believing that creating a process is enough to get the ball rolling is a little bit bullshit. And that happens very often. So it's not about the process of design thinking and lean startup that people have to learn. They have to change the mindset of how they do things currently. I know that design thinking is one of the most common tools used in corporations, but it's not everything. Zuleka, would you like that I tell you a little bit more about these principles of design thinking, so that we can put into context why people embrace this and it's more than just a process?
Yes, please.
Let's do it. So let's think about design thinking as just a creative problem-solving approach that puts people and their pains and their problems and their gains and what they like, what they hate, all together. So it's about not selling what you have already invented or created. It's about focusing only on the problems of a person or a potential customer. So it goes simply about 5 steps, where the first one is about empathy. And by the way, empathy is something that is quite hard to be done. Our brain has a hard time to put their thoughts into the thoughts of somebody else. We don't understand all the signals. We cannot live the same life that you and me are having, Zuleka. So putting myself on your shoes is quite difficult. So, and that's the first part, which means that I need to be able to create mental processes in order to understand the other beyond assumptions, beyond being in front of a PowerPoint and defining this is the persona, where in fact 80% of the persona is the person who created the persona, and that's not working. So empathy is is the first step in terms of design thinking. Then it's about defining the problem, because you cannot solve for the persona all of the problems or pains that he can have. You have to focus on the ones that can be, if you solve that, people are going to be super happy because you have made something that is quite important in the hierarchy of needs of that person. The next one, once you have clearly defined the problem that they have, it is about ideation. And let me tell you one thing. In step 1 and 2, empathy and define, there is a lot of assumptions that you will have. And that means that you will have to iterate and validate these assumptions, because you don't want to fail if you believe that, for instance, Zuleka loves going to the beach every weekend. If that is your assumption, you need to find a way to validate with a small experiment if the persona called Zuleka loves going to the beach or not every day. So the third step is about brainstorming a wide range of ideas. And that is not that difficult, in fact. But something that we have to understand from the human psychology perspective is that the ideas do not come when you are in a rush, when you are under stress. So this brainstorming of 2 hours in order to come with ideas is one of the biggest failures in corporations. When we have a problem, we tend to think about it like when we are taking a shower. So in relaxed moments, when we are going into the nature. So doing a brainstorming of 2 hours doesn't bring solution, it brings stress. And in fact, stress is something that prevents innovation. So you cannot have a deadline of 2 hours in order to come up with ideas. Usually, when we are breaking down this approach in corporations, what we do is that we do it into several phases. The next step is about prototyping. Zuleka, you talked about the minimum viable product. How do we do something where we validate certain assumptions? That the purpose of the prototype is validating, is not that it looks nice, it's about validating assumptions about if people are going to be using. And it can go into a simple fake website that is describing the product. If people are going to read it, that means that, wow, they're interested. You can even fake the fact that people are going to buy the product. 3 things are important for entrepreneurs. Do people need my product? Do people pay for my product? And the third one is, am I capable of doing that product? And this prototyping phase is, the aim is to validate with a user, with real users, how it would work in a simple, cheating way of having a solution. And finally, once the prototype is put into place, it's about testing. That means that real users are going to be looking at the prototype or the product in order to provide feedback. And it's about collecting that feedback and being critical about what they mentioned about this feedback, so that you can pinpoint things that are more important than others. Because we tend to be creative in front of innovation, but the funny thing is that not everything is worthwhile doing. It goes beyond just following a process. It is a mindset where you have to be able to collaborate, because different perspectives are going to increase the value of ideas and assumptions. It is a mindset where you become humble about experimenting, because you are validating even an assumption that you came with. So experimentation is going to be experimentation is going to be needed, like going in front of a person just right away when the idea comes, in order to validate a certain assumption about either how they live the day-to-day, what do they do instead, or would they use the thing that I have called a prototype. The mindset is about constantly change. The mindset is about removing an ego, because we believe sometimes that when we have an idea, this is the most amazing idea, but we need to be humble enough to accept that maybe this idea is not the right solution for a potential customer. Oh, that was powerful. So, Zuleka, tell me more. So, how do we make it happen in reality?
You know, at this session, when we talk about innovation a lot, and we wanted to really give some real world examples, And it always sounds like when you share success stories, everyone's like, oh, big bang, that was quick. They did a great job. But, you know, we work with clients. We know that these, even setting up the foundations, the capabilities to be able to launch a full-blown innovation labs takes months, if not years, depending on the size of the company. I just want to touch on something you said about design thinking, Ivan. It does really rely on assumptions. And if we're so hell-bent on our own assumptions, it really becomes difficult to actually see what the client wants. And oftentimes, customers don't know what they want. So it's not as simple as going to a customer and saying, you know, here you go, what do you think about this? Many customers will look at you with a blank expression. It's only when they're actually using that solution that they're blown away by it. I wanted to give a few maybe global examples just to set the scene, to show different elements of what works in successful innovation labs. And all of these look at design thinking or leverage design thinking and crowdsourcing to an extent. And then I want to do a bit more of a deep dive into a longer case study, or a bigger case study that we've worked with, where we've seen it go from 0 to 100 in about 18 to 24 months. So there's bigger real world example. There's about 4 of them. So I'm going to kick off an example that many of you are probably familiar with, Lego Ideas, right? This platform was used to leverage the community's creativity rather than focusing inwards on employees. So what Lego does is it invites fans from around the world to submit their own brick creations. The community votes on them, and then the most popular designs go into production. And one of the, you know, referring back to the more critical issues or the more important issues today is, for example, the women of NASA or the International Space Station. These actually became new Lego sets. And it's a super example of co-creation. And it forces Lego to keep its product line fresh, and there's a huge amount of creativity around it, while at the same time giving its community, its loyal customers, a sense of ownership over the brand as well. The second example is Procter & Gamble. If any of you have heard of its Connect and Develop program, what they do is, instead of looking at customers, they look beyond their internal teams and they engage their external partners. So they look at scientists, entrepreneurs, as well as their consumers, to help them collaborate on new product development. So if you remember earlier, we talked about it being a numbers game and getting ideas from all parts of the business. P&G have used this to speed up their innovation process. And what they actually have been able to do through this is launch products that might have taken years and years to develop internally. And back to the point that Ivan and I both mentioned earlier, is about being able to deliver innovative products to market a lot faster and a lot more efficiently than they were able to do through their traditional R&D. Another great example is General Electric's first build. And they, similar to P&G, they go to makers, designers, engineers, and the community, and then they work together to solve real world problems. And they've been able to develop a whole range of products. There's Opal Nugget Ice Maker, which sounds really bizarre, and I looked it up, so you should too. But it worked. It didn't come from a top-down R&D approach. It was co-created with the community. It was tested in real-world scenarios. And again, it shows how it went from idea to prototype super, super quickly. And then lastly, before we get into that detailed case study, I want to talk about Unilever's Foundry. And now, a lot of companies are realizing that they're super established. It takes time to come up with new ideas. It takes time to develop these kind of innovation labs. And startups actually have an edge over them in terms of being able to come up with ideas really quickly and do the MVP that we talked about. So what the Foundry does is it partners with startups. So, you know, it parks its bureaucracy and it collaborates with these external entrepreneurs. It gives those in exchange. It gives those startups access to its resources and expertise. So it's a bit of a win-win situation. And it gives the startups as well the backing that they need when they're ready to scale. So instead of trying to ditch what they do best, they're leveraging what they do best and empowering startups to come up with new products and services. All of that to say that it doesn't just happen at service level. We came up with an idea and it's great. Every angle of the business, whether it's your employees, whether it's your customers, whether it's your supply chain, whether it's just external experts, can become involved to help co-create. Are we ready to go into the buyer case study, Ivan, to give them a flavor of what we worked on?
I think that this would be quite eye-opening, Zuleka.
Okay, if anyone is familiar with Bayer, they're 160-plus-year-old pharmaceutical and biotech company. It's probably one of the largest organizations in the world. It has over 100,000 employees in over 80 countries. So when Bayer's Life Sciences iHub came to the table, what they were the same challenges that we've talked about before. They had globally distributed teams. Their R&D's sluggish, maybe too many people at the table, too many processes, you know, decentralized but centralized decision making, so unable to move things quickly through the idea process or the approval process. So when it set out to look at this, or what I like to call our concept of the Innovation Lab, because we call the rolling concept of the Innovation Lab, they had two main goals. And the first one, easy, we want to come up with technology or products that can detect the earliest phase of cardiovascular diseases. So, okay, a new product or service innovation. But secondly, and more importantly, we find in most organizations, its goal was to really create this, a remote culture of innovation, because they're all globally dispersed. They all have their inside knowledge and value that they can bring to the table. Bayer really wanted to bring all these engineers together and improve that internal cooperation between those locations and departments. And because of the scale, they needed a whole ecosystem and they had to get their foundations right. So they went through an initial, it's still ongoing, but at the very first stage, they went through an 18-month program, which covered absolutely everything from equipping employees. So we're talking about building the knowledge and the skills. This is a little bit about design thinking, but that wasn't the only framework. It's about creating, helping employees come up with ideas, creating allies, getting sponsors for those ideas, testing, validating those ideas, getting the endorsements so that, you know, they can start with the execution of them. So train them through that entire skill set. But also, secondly, because it's not just you can create the skill set, but you also need to give employees the mechanisms to be able to do this. And because they're globally distributed, how do we get everyone to contribute ideas? So they needed a super simple and effective tool where they could share their ideas and build on the ideas of others. And what they did was they implemented a tool that we're partnered with. It's called Beinovative, which is a tech platform, super simple, not complicated, easy interface. And all you do is drop your ideas in there, and it can be anonymous. You can put your name to it, and everyone has visibility. And what this meant was that everyone in Bayer that had an idea without any judgment could share those ideas. They can see how well those ideas were received. They could comment on other people's ideas to say, okay, well, what about this? Have you thought about this? And then the ideas that went through the validation phase and then were taken through to execution, an employee in some part of the business was then able to bring it to life. I could keep talking about bio for the next 3 hours, but I just want to simplify it and just give you an idea of at least that initial 18 months, what they achieved. They had 200 plus people that were involved in this program, and they were all sharing ideas. They created this open innovation culture. They're still doing it today, completely transformed the way that they work. And this innovation program then spread to 3 times more people globally within Bayer. So beyond the life sciences iHub, they were able to implement in that 18 months 3 breakthrough products. And then through the vast, thousands of ideas that were generated, we know that there's potential for multi-million-dollar revenue streams that have been discovered through that. So bio is like a huge transformation because we can see the inside of what happened and the amount of effort that went into it, and then the success that everyone else sees on the surface level. So if I was to say, what can we learn from all of these examples? Engaging your community is vital, whether it's your customers, your employees, your external stakeholders, even startups if they're in your ecosystem. Design thinking is the core, but it's not the only one. It's really about that empathy, the rapid prototyping and the iteration. And the organizations have to be designed to allow that or to enable that. And the same with rapid experimentation. If individuals are able to quickly test and drop ideas, and they're allowed to fail, and see it as part of the process rather than a setback, it's a huge value add for these organizations. And just this being able to create this open collaboration space where anyone from any part of the business, not just the strategizers or the transformation teams or the IT teams, everyone should be able to contribute to innovation. And that, again, is driven largely by culture. So from everything we've talked about today, what should our audience not forget, Ivan?
Before that, I just want to put a little bit of context. So the Bayern story is not about the 70s idea box. So it's about enabling the organization to go through the process of design thinking, no matter where you are. So remember these 5 steps where there was empathy. So everybody had the opportunity to crowdsource all the validations, assumptions in every step. As the empathy step, the framing the problem step, the prototyping step, the ideation step, and so on. So it is not the simple idea generation box, because I still remember nobody was opening that box back in my days. You also made me think, Zuleka, about the success rate of product launches in my previous corporation, back in my corporate days, 3%. So only 3% of the launches were successful. And we had a metric to know what is success, even though it looks like a small market share metric to say this is a success or not, but 3%. But imagine that every product launch was costing $500,000 minimum. So how much can an organization save if they adopt the right approach in terms of change that goes beyond just the design thinking? Probably a solution can be our approach with the rolling innovation framework, but there is also many other approaches. I just wanted to highlight that in order to bring innovation labs to life, you need to be able to point out the individual. So immerse the person, the employee, into the growing set of behaviors that you want him to develop in order to be more innovative. And that is not about having a class training. It is a mindset and certain behaviors that he has to practice. The use of behavioral science in order to develop creative thinking, problem solving, is quite powerful today. And it doesn't need a 3 hours training for the full organization, by the way. They just need to understand what could be this operating system that they have to develop in their mind in order to start thinking on problems, start thinking about how do you solve a problem using creative thinking, and having the possibility to practice. And when you are building these capabilities, then you need to lay down the land so that these capabilities can be practiced, encouraging experimentation and risk-taking. So a place where people are allowed to talk only based on seniority is not ready to big changes, is not ready to have an innovation lab that is going to work. The second thing that is quite critical is about this, and you have mentioned it, Zuleka, the ability to have real sponsor, real allies, senior leadership having a stake where they buy in on the process, on the change that goes beyond just training people on design thinking, but the change in terms of culture that needs to be done. And they need to be able to role model these behaviors. Otherwise, nobody's going to take it. It's not the thing for the young people in the organization. It's the thing that everybody should do. And that's why we call it culture. The way they are going to be communicating and reinforcing the message of about the progress, the value of the innovation lab, and how you are going to cross-pollinate this creativity across the organization needs to be something that the sponsor allies should be doing. Finally, you have mentioned several times about the power of bringing these ideas of a pilot into full execution. There needs to be a robust process for not only for idea generation, the evaluation and prototyping. There needs to be clear criteria for selecting and prioritizing projects. And there needs to be the adequate resources and support to bring successful pilots to market. You cannot have an organization that wants to create an innovation lab that is going to spread across the organization, where is the thing that they have to do on top of their usual job. It is, you have to allocate a time where a person can dedicate himself or herself to that specific innovation task. There are many organizations today allocating, having the Fridays as the day for just innovation, to work in another project than your day-to-day job. And that is quite amazing, because that frees the time for people to be mentally ready to bring ideas to life. Oh, by the way, I know that there was somebody who has put a question about metrics, and we are going to talk about it after the conclusion. Zuleka, now I'm going to answer to your question. What we have to bring back with us is that there is a whole ecosystem behind finished product or services, and this includes people, yes, us, giving them capability and enablers. And then there needs to be the structures. How do we make it happen for them to execute? You gave the example of having a digital tool, that there is many ways in order to catalyze innovation across an organization. And by the way, Zuleka and I, we have been working with different approaches, from the digital tool to having a startup co-creating innovation in corporations. The other thing is that the biggest challenge is that change is difficult. Think about it. The simple thing about that we all promise ourselves and in December is we want to lose weight, and how difficult it is just to do that simple thing. So change is not something natural in human beings. We love the status quo. Our brain creates chemical signals that prevent us to do some change. So you have to understand that it's not by encouraging your people, talking about overselling your change or their innovation that you are going to convince them. There is going to be more resistance in some cultures more than others. That's right. In Serbia, that we know. What we have to keep in mind is that change is possible. And that's why we have created an approach of that where design thinking is just the initial step to activate others through our unique concept of rolling innovation labs. And if you want to know more about it, we are more than happy to share it with you. And thank you very much for the opportunity. And any questions today?
Thank you very much, both Ivan and Zuleka. I think we could talk about this for hours, actually.
Yes.
Very insightful. So there was a question about how do you actually measure success or return of investment on an innovation lab? What are the key metrics?
There is two ways, Zuleka, if you allow me. I'm just going to frame the two ways, and one way it has to do with you deeply. So there is the same way that any investor judges innovation. So when you are a tech startup, you go to an investor, you do your pitch, they know already that a certain percentage of startups where they're going to put their money are going to generate more than 20 times their investment within the 3 to 5 years. And they know that there is a larger potential of innovation or startups that are going to be a little bit bigger in terms of quantity. And there is some ideas that are going to help, basically. That's one way to put it in terms of financial impact. Now, what we do is, even though we support organizations to define the governance and the framework of how they're going to be, they could potentially judge it, is that we look at a little bit the change as a little bit like the engagement that you have in social media. So we are going to be constantly measuring a set of 13 dimensions that are important in order to drive innovation in an organization. We don't focus so much on the outcome, but we know that with these 13 dimensions, we have solid research to prove that there is a correlation between these 13 dimensions and final outcomes that are going to work. But what we want is that in the span of our service that we provide, we are constantly measuring if there is a delta in parameters like, I don't know, leadership support, in parameters like customer focus, like the creativity, persistence, risk-taking, adaptability, collaboration, curiosity, things that when you add them together, and these are basic human things, but we don't ask them, have you become more curious? We ask them, what have you done? You know, what is important is not to say from 1 to 10, have you been more curious? No. People are going to bullshit, of course. You ask, what are the actions that you have done? And sometimes we help them to track these actions in a recurrent basis, because what we want is that people takes reflexes, habits of doing the same thing in little steps so that it becomes something natural and it becomes a culture. Being curious, asking questions. How do you ask questions? Can you practice that just asking questions to a new friend or a new colleague? And that's how we do it. So, Zuleka, sorry, I think I overtalk. I'm sorry.
No, well, you do a little bit, but it's okay. That's what we write together. But hit the nail on the head. I mean, there's obviously the financial ROI, and we always work with C-suite or the decision makers to sort of remove them from that subjectivity as well. Because, you know, we've always done it this way, or, you know, we should always listen to the key decision maker and let everything else fall by the wayside. We create, and it's super tailored. It's a quite unique framework for everyone to work against when they're endorsing ideas. But at the same time, it's the intangibles that in the longer term, a bit like the social media effect that Ivan said, in the longer term, they pay the greatest dividends. And you'll see that as the business grows, your customer experience improves and the loyalty and all the other metrics just naturally flow from having these foundations right in the first instance.
Exactly.
Thank you both. And just question for mine, what's your suggestion on how best to raise awareness about the importance of innovation labs in smaller cultures, countries? It's not, I don't think it's very global at this point, actually.
Oh, in fact, you would be astonished that even in big countries, like it all depends on the willingness of the specific organization culture, the culture readiness.
So it's a leader question, pretty much.
Exactly. So it doesn't depend on the culture of the people. So it is a good bullshit that some CEOs are saying that, yeah, this wouldn't work in the Middle East, that wouldn't work in Serbia, that wouldn't work in Switzerland, we are too conservative whatsoever. No, that doesn't have to do anything. It is about the culture and organization, because when you go to Switzerland, you find these big assets startup or big corporations that have already this agility in their mindset, or in terms of maturity, they have reached something that is quite powerful. And it works. So it's not the country. Let's say we haven't seen any correlation, because funny enough, one CEO asked that question and we had to look for that answer.
But if you want to start small. I mean, it doesn't have to even be that complicated, Philip. It's get everyone to sit in a room and, put Post-its together of what the biggest challenges are and then build on that. And there you go. You've got your first concept of an innovation. It might be micro innovation to begin with, as people sort of learn to develop where the problems are or how to finesse their ideas. But again, to Ivan's point, it's definitely within the culture. If I create an innovation lab but don't let you come up with ideas, I've just got a really something shiny with a badge on it, and vice versa. So
no, I completely understand. I think I've been personally part of, maybe I didn't know it with innovation lab name, but I've been a part of similar things, and sometimes without proper structure, it could even be only time consuming and not really productive. So it takes a little bit of, I think, leadership and form to make it work.
100%.
Well, thank you very much for everything. I don't think we have any questions. We had a few insightful session comments, but thank you both for the insightful presentation. I could listen to it for hours. So you're really nice speakers and fun speakers to listen to. So thank you everyone as well for attending. I wish everyone a lovely rest of the day or the evening, depending when you're based. And we look forward to seeing you at one of the future sessions.